Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video I want to talk about how pilots typically make best use of the radios on their aircraft. So we have 3 radios on our aircraft installed, and that applies to pretty much any airliner, Boeing, Airbus and other types as well. So we have VHF-1, VHF-2, VHF-3, we have 3 radio tuning panels, and then per seat in the cockpit we typically have 1 audio control panel. Now let's start with what you would use your radio tuning panels for. You can see already that we have set the captain's side to VHF-1, the first officer's side to VHF-2 and the third one to VHF-3. Now these positions are actually interchangeable, however they are assigned a default position. So if we, for example, take the first officer's radio tuning panel and set it to VHF-1, you see that off-side tuning light up here illuminate. Now if you put the left one to VHF-2, then once again you have no double assignment, so that light goes out again. Now typically on the captain's side we would be using the active ATC. And the captain's side means the radio tuning panel on the captain's side. It does not necessarily mean that it is only the captain using that. Quite the opposite instead. So, as you can see over here, I tuned the VATSIM Honeycomb frequency 122.8 as there is currently no ATC online, and on standby I have whatever frequency either was last or is next. I will go into a little bit further detail about the radio tuning in a moment, but let's first talk about the other 2 panels. So on panel number 2, we by default have VHF number 2. On VHF2 by default guard frequency is active, so in case ATC can't reach you for whatever reason on the primary frequency, they've got this backup where they can call you. And this is also where you would be called, for example, if you were intercepted by the military. So if a fighter jet comes up to your cockpit, they will try to reach you on that frequency. Then, on the standby frequency over here, we typically have the HOTAS of your departure or destination airport, or for temporary use, the company communication frequency. That may be, for example, the frequency of the handling agent that you are trying to reach, for example, to tell them your exact arrival time, etc. Finally then, we have VHF number 3 that we've got set on the 3rd radio tuning panel, and on here by default the data frequency is active. Now the data frequency here is what is used by the airplane's CPDLC and ACARS in order to be able to communicate with the outside world. So if you were to switch this around, for example, so data is no longer active, the airplane loses its connection and it can take several minutes to rebuild the connection once you dial data in again. Now if you're wondering how to get to the data frequency, you basically take the lowest frequency and then just dial it one further to the bottom and then you're in data. And that way you can enable the data on the number 3 radio. Now, if you were to fly an airplane that is not equipped with either ACARS or CPDLC, then you would typically tune 1 to 1.5 in the 3rd radio tuning panel, and then you would just switch it off. So like this, 1 to 1.5, and then press the off button, and like that the thing is turned off. But as mentioned, during normal operation data is active over here, and that is what's needed in order to uplink, for example, your flight plan or your winds, etc. into your FMC. Now, let's quickly talk about the management of what you actually want to listen to. So you can see we've got the audio control panels down here, the left one for the captain, the right one for the first officer, and then on the aft overhead panel we have one more for the person on the jump seat. Now, the one on the jump seat we're not using at the moment, but let's quickly talk about what you would use on your audio control panel. So a lot of flight simmers seem to think that the captain would normally transmit on VHF-1 and listen to that, and the first officer on VHF-2. Now that is not true at all. Indeed, the PMDG is a little bit misleading by default, because by default the mic selector on the first officer side is set to VHF-2, but that is not what you would use. So the normal setup is like this. So what do we have now? Well, both pilots are listening to VHF-1 and VHF-2. The normal transmit is over VHF-1 because normally you talk to ATC over VHF-1, while on VHF-2 you'd just monitor the guard frequency or listen to the HOTAS. But the only time when you would actually transmit on VHF2 is when you would try to talk to your handling agent over the handling frequency. Then obviously you'd have the flight interphone turned up, as that is what you are using to talk to your colleague, or rather to listen to your colleague, because talking to them is actually done through the button down here. So by default you do not transmit on the intercom. In order to do it, you have to move that little switch down here into the intercom position. Now here is a fun fact. Not on all 737s the intercom switch is a sticky switch, but it can indeed be default spring-loaded back to the middle position. Now it is always spring-loaded from the RT side, as you can see over here. I need to hold my mouse to the RT position because this is how I transmit. But on the intercom, the PMDG has the good option where it's sticky, so it just stays in that position and you actively have to move it back to the middle position to turn that off again. Now, a friend of mine flew for Germania while the airline still existed, and they did not have this sticky intercom switch. So they just typically used a rubber band and then fixed it around, for example, the HF sensitivity down here to stick the switch into position so that they're able to talk to the colleague without actively having to hold down the push-to-talk key. Now, the remainder of the radios you have down here. You have VHF3, but you wouldn't listen to that because, as said, this is set to the data button. Then you have the HF1 and 2, and the PMDG aircraft is actually fitted with an HF radio as well. So you could use the HF radios on here, which you would normally do when you're flying over remote areas such as the Atlantic Ocean or through Central Africa. Now, next to that, the flight interphone, as I just mentioned, and then you have the service interphone, which is how you can talk to your cabin crew and listen to the cabin crew. Now here's a little fun fact. When the service is dialed up to listen to it, you always hear what's going on in the galley because the microphone in the attendant headset is a hot mic, so you can always listen to what they're saying back in the galley, even though it may be a little bit quiet at times and there may be a little bit of disruptive voices as well. Finally, you have the PA. Now this is what you would use to listen to the PAs that the cabin crew is doing, and obviously on here you could transmit on the PAs. However, this is not regularly used for transmitting. Now, you might have seen those videos where somebody is doing a PA over the radio and blocks the ATC frequency for a while. That's exactly the reason why we would not normally use that, but why we would actually use the PA handset that most aircraft have fitted down here. You can actually see it over here. You got the passenger address down here, and normally a handset would be fitted into here, and that is what you would use to make your PAs, because that excludes you from accidentally trying to make a PA over the microphone down here, which is how you would do it over your headset, and then accidentally leaving your transmit on VHF1 and then blocking the ATC frequency for a minute or whatever your PA takes. Rest assured, however, I can tell you, you get some very interesting responses when you accidentally do your PA on the ATC frequency. Not that I tried myself, but heard it 1,000 times. Finally, a little bit further down, we have the NAV1 and 2 and the ADF1 and 2. This is how you could listen to the identification of your nav aids. However, by default, it's not required to do that because your airplane is able to identify them on your own. So, giving you a quick example of that, let's take a DME that is somewhere in the region, or a VOR. Let's just about go for Bravo Kilo Delta, for example. So, let's quickly grab the frequency from here. Nav data, we are looking for Bravo Kilo Delta, ident, thank you. And it is 17.7, so let's put that active in the radio. 17.7. And now you can see how the airplane is showing you the ident of the radio over there. Now the PMDG is rather quick to do that. The real one can take quite a bit longer, because what actually happens is it listens out automatically on the radio, and then it decodes the Morse code that is transmitted over there, and it decodes that into the letters down here, and that is the letters that you see. So if you see the correct ident of the radio station in question, then the airplane has automatically decoded it for you, and therefore you don't need to cross-check that anymore manually. Alright, And that is about what you have down here. Then you have the mask and boom mic switch. Obviously, if you switch this to the masked position, then it translates the microphone from your headset boom mic over to the microphone of your oxygen mask. Finally, that little switch down here, you don't really touch, never had to touch it at all. And the last switch over here is the normal and alternate position. The alternate is what you do when you have panel failure, and it basically degrades your communication capabilities so that Captain transmits VHF 1 and so on. So the last thing I want to talk about in today's video is how we are normally using the VHF 1 radio. So as I mentioned, by default we tune VHF 1 on the captain's side, VHF 2 on the first officer's side. So in any case, the first officer needs to reach over to the captain's panel to tune the active ATC frequency if the first officer is pilot monitoring and therefore handling the radios. For that reason, you see on the mic selector, I've selected VHF 1 on the first officer's side, as he is also transmitting on VHF 1 by default. Now finally, for the radios on the ground, you would pre-select your delivery frequency into the active, and then you would pre-select your apron or whatever frequency comes next. You would typically get that from the airport charts, and then you switch the frequencies along as you continue your flight. A little thing here that is special, that is on takeoff you typically pre-select the departure frequency after you've been handed off to the tower. So you switch to the tower frequency, you call the tower, and when you've made positive contact so that you can be sure that you no longer need the previous frequency, then you would pre-select the departure frequency down here. For example, 135.350 for Cologne departure, and so on. So that is how you handle that. A final word over here, in flight, when you switch to another frequency, let's say we want to switch to 135.35 now, you'd make your contact over there, and after you made contact, you would keep the other frequency in the standby, just in case, for example, you dialed in an incorrect frequency. So there have been cases where people dialed in a wrong frequency, tried to contact that, got no response, and then changed the standby so that you were no longer able to resume to the previous frequency. If that happens, well, you can always use 1 to 1.5 to make a general call to all stations in the area, but all ATC stations, all pilots and the military are going to receive that, so it is a little bit embarrassing if you need to ask for your active frequency over the guard frequency. However, it is there for you in case you lose your active station and in case you are no longer able to revert to the previous, which you should, however, avoid in the first place. Alright, so that is how we use the radios on the 737 and also on the Airbus, by the way. We do it in pretty much the exact same way, with a single difference that in the Airbus, the first officer would, if you have to tune the radio frequency, just switch over to the VHF on their side, dial in the frequency, put it active, then go back to VHF 2, because in the Airbus you have the thrust levers right in the middle of the radio tuning panels, and therefore it is quite difficult to reach over to the other side and be able to tune something, as it means you constantly have to lean over, which just isn't that comfortable. Alright, so that's it for today's video, guys. I do hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, then do let me know in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to your feedback. And if you are flying real-world aircraft, then let me know if you use your radios in the same way, or if your operator is doing it completely different. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked this one. If you did, then do leave a like in YouTube as well, as it does help with the algorithms. Leave a comment to let me know what you think about it, and finally, if you're up for more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you all again on the next one.